Hello, in this video we're going to be solving polynomial equations by factoring. Frequently people will say solving quadratic equations by factoring if the term is a squared term, but you can actually go with higher polynomials using your factoring skills. But in this video we're going to cover mostly quadratics. So here's a couple examples, x squared plus x minus 6 equals 0, etc. So what's really important is that you have your prerequisites, which is factoring polynomials. If you have not mastered how to factor polynomials, you will get very frustrated with this lesson. You really need to have a good toolbox full of tools on how to factor polynomials. So just a couple examples. Greatest common factor, GCF, factoring simple trinomials, factoring non-simple trinomials, for example with the AC method, factoring difference of two squares, which we call dots. Maybe sometimes it's called difference of squares. There's a nice variety of factoring polynomial techniques, and you really have to have a good repertoire of skills before you learn how to solve equations using factoring. So let's go through the three steps. The first thing you want to do with an equation is you want to set it equal to 0. The reason why we do this is we're going to use something called the zero product rule. After you've set it equal to 0, you really want to factor one side of the equation. So and this is not optional. It has to be a product. You have to have something times something else equals 0. And again, the reason why we do that is we are going to use the zero product rule. And the zero product rule says that blank times blank equals 0. Well, one of those numbers has to be 0. So the way you use the zero product rule is you're going to write and solve an equation, a new equation, for every factor that you have in your factored polynomial. So let's take a look at some examples. Our first example is already factored. Now, one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to ease our way into the skill. So the first example, which is x plus 4 times the quantity x minus 3, this has already been factored. So we're going to not really need to do a whole lot. It's already factored, it's already set equal to 0, so we're going to jump right in and use the zero product rule. And the zero product rule says we write new equations. So x plus 4 equals 0, or x minus 3. X minus 3 equals 0. And again, the zero product rule says something like this. If you have two numbers, and it really could be three numbers. If you have two numbers, I'm going to represent them with boxes, and you multiply them and you get 0, that means that one of these must be 0. Either the one on the left is 0 or the one on the right is 0. One of these numbers has to be 0. If you multiply two numbers and you get 0, that's essentially the zero product rule. So what we've done here is we've written two equations, and then we just need to solve them. Write and solve these equations. And this one is pretty obvious, x equals -4, and on this one, x equals +3. Now frequently we actually write the final answer in set notation. So you may have -4, 3 in brackets, in curly brackets. This is not an ordered pair, so please do not use parentheses here. So this may be our final answer. And you could always check by plugging in these numbers. How about this next example, which also is in factored form? Well, we're going to write and solve several equations. Now in this case we have three factors. So I have 5y equals 0, or 3y minus 2 equals 0, or y plus 8 equals 0. And again, we're going to solve all of these. 5y equals 0 ends up with y equals 0. 3y minus 2 equals 0, I'm going to do a step in my head. 3y equals 2, or y equals 2/3. And then the last one is y plus 8 equals 0. Subtract 8 from both sides, y equals -8. So our final answer, again using curly brackets, would be 0, 2/3, -8. And I just put those in the order that I found them, but sometimes some teachers will insist that you put them in numerical order. But that's my solution set. Now how about this next one? This next one confuses a lot of students, so please be careful. They've seen example 2 with the 5y, and now they see the 7, and so they immediately jump in and they say 7 is one of the answers. And this is not true. 7 is not one of the answers, because if we were to write an equation, the equation would look like this: 7 equals 0, or z plus 9 equals 0. Well, notice this or. This or does not mean and. Obviously 7 cannot equal 0. So that's kind of silly. 7 can't equal 0. The only thing that could equal 0 is z plus 9. And if z plus 9 is equal to 0, that means z has to equal negative 9. So our solution set is just negative 9. Okay? So please be careful. Don't just write 7 as part of your solution because it looks like a pattern that you've seen before. All right, here's a couple of other examples. Just going back to our list of steps. The first thing we want to do is set these things equal to 0. So far, everything we've done has been set equal to 0. Then we're going to factor one side of the equation. And again, thus far, everything's been factored. And then lastly, we use the zero product rule. Now, in these two examples, they're set equal to 0, so we don't have to do step 1, set it equal to 0, but they're not in factored form, so we are going to have to factor. Now, on the left, we have a simple trinomial, and a simple trinomial can be factored by inspection. So in this case, I'm going to have an x times x, that's x squared, and then I ask myself, what times what is a negative 6? Well, it's going to be a positive times a negative, has to be. And then I say, what times what is negative 6 that adds up to a positive 1? It would have to be a positive 3 times a negative 2. And I could jump right into my answer. X plus 3 equals 0, or x minus 2 equals 0. So my solution set is going to be negative 3, comma, positive 2. Now, I hope you see, I just skipped a step here. I didn't write x equals negative 3. X equals positive 2. So once you start doing a bunch of these, you're going to recognize that when I see a factor that says x minus 2, my possible answer is positive 2. So that's going to come very quickly with time. Now check out the one on the right, 5y squared minus 20 equals 0. Here I have a GCF. This is why we say that you really have to have a good repertoire of skills. You should just recognize this GCF. And this would be 5 times the quantity 4y minus, 5 times the quantity y squared minus 4, and this quantity, this product is equal to 0. And now we're going to use the zero product rule. Now 5 can't be 0, so that doesn't make any sense. But actually we're not going to use the zero product rule, we could factor further. 5 times, this is a difference of two squares, y plus 2 times the quantity y minus 2. And that all equals 0. So we end up with 3 factors. But I hope you see that only 2 of these factors are going to give us answers. So we can either have a y is equal to a negative 2, or a y is equal to a positive 2. That was supposed to say 2. So our final solution set is, sometimes people write plus or minus 2, or sometimes they just write it out, negative 2 and then a positive 2. Okay, final answer. Now, we have not yet had to set anything equal to 0. In this problem, it is set equal to 12. You cannot use the zero product rule if it's not set equal to 0. There is no 12 product rule. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to set this thing equal to 0. We want to set up a trinomial so that it is equal to 0, and then we can use the zero product rule. So here I subtracted 12 from both sides. And now I am ready to factor. And again, this could be factored by inspection. It is a simple trinomial. I don't think this video has any non-simple trinomials, but you have to have a good repertoire of skills. So simple trinomial, I have a product of negative 12, so one of these is going to be positive, one of them is going to be negative. What times what is a negative 12 that adds up to a negative 4? That would be a negative 6 and a positive 2. And so this gives me my final answer. Again, I'm skipping a couple steps. M plus 2 equals 0 gives me a negative 2. M minus 6 equals 0 gives me a positive 6. So this is my final answer. All right. Going back to our list of rules, the first thing we want to do is set it equal to 0. Then we factor one side of the equation, and then we use the zero product rule. So this last example, we had to do all three of those steps. We set it equal to 0, we factored, we used the zero product rule. Now, this last example, I'm just going to say be careful, because what people see on the left side of this equation, they see a nice trinomial that's just begging to be factored. So let's factor that. We're going to have an x, and what times what is a positive 8 that adds up to a 6? That would be a positive 4 and a positive 2. And I hope you see that there is a huge problem with this. This is not using the zero product rule. I cannot use the zero product rule. It's not set equal to 0. So just to give you an example, if I have two numbers and the product is 15, can you tell me what the numbers are? The answer is no. It might be 1 times 15, it might be 3 times 5, it could be even 2 times 7.5. And of course there's a bunch of negatives as well. Negative 15 times 1, etc. This is not the correct method of solution. Going back to the beginning, the very first thing you want to do is set your equation equal to 0. And that is something I did not do here. So let's set it equal to 0 by subtracting 15 from both sides. In fact, let's just get rid of all this nonsense. So I'm going to subtract 15 from both sides. And when I subtract 15 from both sides, I now am setting it equal to 0. X squared plus 6x. Now 8 minus 15 is going to be a negative 7. And this is equal to 0. I am now setting this equal to 0. Now I can do my factoring. And fortunately, this is a simple trinomial. And simple trinomials you should be able to factor by inspection. I have an x and an x. The product is negative 7, so one of these is going to be positive, one of them is going to be negative. What times what is negative 7 that adds up to a 6? That would be a positive 7 times negative 1. And so our final answer would be negative 7, comma 1. Again, I did the last couple steps using mental math. You should be able to go from a factored form to the final answer pretty quickly after you've done several of these. So please be careful that you follow the steps. Set the equation equal to 0, then factor, then use the zero product rule. The best thing to do is just practice. So please give yourself a lot of practice problems and just keep plugging at them until you get the skill. Good luck.